dream became. The news reports grew grimmer by the day. Weather patterns had become erratic, and scientists were warning of a possible climate shift. The local river had been flooding its banks, and the government had started issuing warnings. His friends and family laughed off his boat-building endeavor, calling him a modern-day Noah. But he couldn't ignore the feeling deep in his bones that told him to prepare. The boat was taking shape, a sturdy vessel that could handle the tumultuous waters he feared were coming. He had designed it with a cabin, large enough to store his supplies and a small area to live in. The thought of being isolated on the water for months, perhaps years, was daunting, but the alternative was too terrifying to consider. He taught himself how to fish and hunt, his backyard turning into a practice ground for survival skills. One evening, as the last sliver of sun disappeared, a neighbor approached the fence, curiosity piqued by the sounds of construction. "What on earth are you building there, son?" the old man asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. He explained the dream, expecting ridicule, but the neighbor merely nodded. "I had a dream like that once," he said, "about a great storm that would swallow the world. I built a shelter, not a boat, but the feeling was the same. You keep at it. Sometimes dreams are more than just dreams." The conversation lingered with him, and he worked into the night, the glow of his workshop light casting eerie shadows across the lawn. He thought about the people he knew, the life they lived, and the future that seemed so uncertain. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing something important, something that transcended the confines of his quiet suburban street. As the boat neared completion, the town's whispers grew louder. People stopped by to gawk at the vessel, some offering help, others scoffing at his foolishness. But he remained focused, driven by the dream that had hijacked his reality. The final touches were the hardest, the details that would determine the boat's seaworthiness. He had to trust his instincts, his dream, because no manual could prepare him for the end of the world. The night before the supposed deluge, the air grew thick with anticipation. Rain pattered against the windows, a gentle prelude to the storm he feared. He loaded the last of his supplies, feeling the weight of his solitude more than ever. As he lay in the cabin that night, the boat rocking slightly in the makeshift berth, he allowed himself to doubt. Was he insane? Or was he the only one who truly understood the gravity of what was to come? The storm arrived with a fury that shook the very earth. Rain hammered the boat like an angry mob, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. He watched as the water began to rise, swallowing his yard, then his street, then the houses that lined the riverbank. His heart pounded in his chest as the water reached his doorstep, then his windows, and finally, the top of his boat. With a final, desperate heave, he pushed the boat free from its moorings and climbed aboard. The river was a raging beast, its banks lost to the dark, churning water. His stomach lurched as the boat was tossed about like a toy in a bathtub. He had to act fast, securing everything in its place before the full brunt of the flood hit. The wind screamed around him, tearing at the sails he had rigged in a desperate hope for propulsion. He gripped the oars, his knuckles white with tension, and began to row. The river was a tumult of debris and danger, but he had no choice but to navigate it. His eyes darted from side to side, searching for any signs of life amidst the destruction. His home, his entire life, was now just a memory, swallowed by the relentless waves. The only company he had was the rhythmic splash of the oars and the mournful cries of distant animals. He had said his goodbyes to the world he knew, unsure if he would ever see it again. Each stroke brought him closer to the unknown. The dream that had consumed him for weeks, now a stark reality. The days turned into a blur of rowing and survival. He fished from the boat, the waters teeming with life, driven to the surface by the chaos below. The rain didn't let up, but the boat held firm, a testament to his feverish labor. The cabin was cramped, but it was dry and warm, thanks to the small stove he had installed. The root cellar held his precious supplies, a bastion of hope in a world gone mad. As the waters continued to rise, he saw others in their own makeshift vessels, their eyes filled with terror and despair. Some called out to him, begging for help, but he knew he couldn't save everyone. The weight of their fate was a heavy burden, one he wasn't prepared to bear. He pushed on, the dream's urgency now a grim reality. The world was indeed ending, and he was one of the few who had heeded the call. The first week passed in a blur of rain and waves. His hands grew blistered and raw from rowing, but he couldn't afford to stop. The boat was his ark, his only hope against the deluge that had claimed everything he had ever known. The radio had gone silent, the news reports replaced by static. He was adrift in a sea of uncertainty, his only guide the stars that peeked through the storm clouds at night. The food was plentiful for now. He had learned quickly how to fish and hunt from his grandfather's stories, but the monotony of his diet was already setting in. The quiet solitude of his boat was punctuated only by the sounds of the storm and the occasional splash of something large moving beneath the surface. It was both comforting and terrifying to be so close to nature's fury. As the waters grew calmer, the reality of his situation grew more apparent. The landscape had changed, the familiar contours of his town replaced by a vast expanse of water that stretched to the horizon. Trees, once towering sentinels, now floated like matchsticks, and the rooftops of houses had become tiny islands in a sea of brown water. He knew he had to find higher ground before the boat was swamped. The dream had given no instructions on where to go, only that he had to survive. He studied the map he had brought with him, the ink slightly smudged from the dampness. There was a hill, several miles away, that stood above the rising waterline. It was his best hope. He adjusted the sails to catch the wind, which had picked up, and hoped it would guide him there. Thank you for your time. God bless.